we also tried over the years to bring orchestras to the university. Among the orchestras, we had the London Symphony Orchestra conducted by Andre Previn one time.
Wow.
A beautiful concert. And a real coup, I thought, we brought the Cleveland Orchestra to Greenville.
And tell us the significance of that.
They, at that time, and I think still today, the 5 most important orchestras in the United States are the New York Philharmonic, the Boston Symphony, the Chicago Orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and the Cleveland Symphony. Yeah. So one of the top 5 we brought here.
In the country.
And I was able, through negotiations with the agency in New York, to bring that orchestra for $13,000.
Wow, and the regular asking price was much higher.
It was considerably more than that. Another time, much later, in 1992, Columbia Artist Management was, well, I got a call from Columbia Artist Management. And I was informed that they were going to tour the National Orchestra of Spain on the 500th anniversary of Columbus' voyage to the New World. And the agent said, and I know you want the orchestra on your fine series. I said, yeah, I do. What is the price? He said, $75,000. I'm sorry, $70,000.
$70,000, yeah.
And I said, well, I don't have that much money in my budget. And I told him, well, I said, I know you're going to book the orchestra at the Kennedy Center, and I'm sure you will book them in Charleston, Charlotte, Columbia, South Carolina. And you're going to need me because the American Federation of Musicians at that time, I don't know if they still do, but at that time they controlled the mileage orchestras could travel.
Mm-hmm. In between jobs.
Between performances, domestic and foreign. And I said, so I'm about halfway between, so you are going to need me. So give me a call. Well, 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a call. He said, have I got a deal for you? I'm going to make you the orchestra available to you for half price, $35,000. I said, well, since we talked, I booked a small ensemble, and I just have $32,000 left in the budget, and so I will give you $32,000 for the orchestra. And we worked out a deal.
Wow.
So we had the National Orchestra of Spain for $32,000.
And I was at that performance, and it was wonderful.
It was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was.
So we had many wonderful artists. I also not only worked with the committees for the Fine Arts Series, and in my job description, I was in charge of all negotiations with management, all contracting. I signed all the contracts. But I also worked with the committees that did popular entertainment too. And one year at the annual conference I attended in New York, the conference, the Association of College and University Performing Arts Presenters. One of the agents, well, to be more exact, an agent from the Willard Alexander Agency, invited me along with a couple of other fellows who were attending the conference to have dinner with him at the Playboy Club. Well, we'd never been to a Playboy Club, so you know we were happy to accept his invitation. And while we were having dinner, he said, when we finish dinner, I'm going to take you down to to a nightclub. And as I recall, it was the upstairs, downstairs, or downstairs, upstairs. I don't remember which is which. But anyway, to hear a female singer that is going to be great, and I want to get her some experience on college campuses, and I will make her available for $500 per performance.
Wow.
Okay, we had dinner and we went down to the club to hear this woman singer. She was terrific. All of us thought she was great. Okay, I finished my conference and returned home. And in a few days, I got the committee together. And I told them about my experience. And I said, we can get this performer for $500. She's going to be great, and I know you will want to have her. And they said, we've never heard of her. I said, well, we are not going to book any performer that you've heard the name for $500. And you know, they would not agree to do it. That young lady's name was Bette Midler. And we missed out on getting Bette Midler because students were not willing to take a chance.
Wow.
And we didn't have many losses like that over the years, but that was one I will never forget because they responded very well to recommendations I made, but that was one time I couldn't sell it. So those are some of the things we did, some of the successes, and an occasional loser. I also booked Flip Wilson, the comedian, for $700. I attended a showcase of new talent, and Flip Wilson performed, and he's the only performer that I've ever wanted to quit because I was laughing so hard. I was getting stomach pains from laughing so hard at this guy, and we booked him, and he put on a great performance here at a fee of $700.
Wow.
The next season his fee was $7,000, and it went up.
He took off, yeah. So let's talk about Wright Auditorium. It was a multi-use facility, but there was an upgrade, and in fact, it was upgraded to become a performance hall. How did that come about, and when about did that happen?
Well, the auditorium got in such a bad state of repair till I just refused to use it. And we were booking a solo artist at a moderate price level and small ensembles and putting them in Hendricks Theater in the Student Center, which seats about 700 people.
Yeah.
And after a couple of years of that, the Chancellor, Dr. John Howell, was able to secure some funds from the state to improve Wright Auditorium. And he hired an architect, and he appointed a small committee on campus to work with the architect. And eventually I wound up in charge, and I dealt with the architect through the planning and the work in renovating the auditorium. I asked the architect to rake the seating so we'd have much better sight lines than previously, and to improve the acoustics, and to do everything possible to turn this old multi-purpose building into a concert hall. The first thing the architect asked me before we even got as far as I just mentioned was, what will the principal usage be? And I told him concerts. I knew that we had other programs there, but primarily we would do concerts. And I asked him to consider that as far as acoustics. And further, I asked him to please employ an acoustical engineer to advise him so that we could have a hall that would make an orchestra or any musical performance sound its very best. So he, to my delight, hired a man by the name of Ren Perrin. He told me Mr. Perrin had been the acoustical expert called in to correct deficiencies in the acoustics in Avery Fisher Hall in Lincoln Center, New York. So I thought we really had a jewel.
Yeah.
Mr. Perrin was not an acoustical engineer, he was an acoustical architect. And he advised us on the type of seating. The seating in Wright Auditorium has the same characteristics, an empty seat, as someone sitting there. And he advised us on the treatment of the walls of the building and to put paneling over the windows and all sorts of things to do. And once the auditorium was completed, the artists that have performed there have commented to me very favorably on the hall as a performing arts facility. For example, the acoustics are such that it will make a chamber orchestra almost sound like a symphony. Mm-hmm. The reverberation and so forth. It is not good for the spoken word. It is not good for lectures or a lot of theater performances because the treatment in the renovations were done for music. And I don't think there is anything as such as a good multi-purpose facility.
Yeah.
It is either good for one or the other.
How many seats are in Wright Auditorium about?
There are 1,500 and I think 1,510. Mm-hmm. They have changed the sound booth and brought it down on the main floor where it was on the second floor. So they've lost a few seats there.
Seats, yeah.
So probably today 1,450.
Let's talk about the series. You were at East Carolina University your entire career. Until you retired, you spoke about your work in the military and then with the Boy Scouts. But from 1962 until 1995,
yes,
33 years.
33 years.
You managed the Performing Arts Series. And in fact, I don't know the exact year, I bet you do. People have been so impressed with what you've done, Rudy, that it's now the S. Rudolph Alexander Performing Arts Series. When did that honor take place?
The Chancellor held a reception for me, and during the reception, on behalf of himself and the Board of Trustees, he presented me with a framed picture of Wright Auditorium, and underneath was S. Rudolph Alexander Performing Arts Series, and there was also a plaque, and I was shocked beyond. I was just speechless because I had no idea any such thing was going to happen, and to think of the trustees and the Chancellor doing that, it meant the world to me.
Wow.
I'm sure I didn't deserve it, and I told him that, but I said I'm certainly going to take it.
And the Chancellor at that time was Richard Aiken, I believe.
It was, and I shall always be grateful to Chancellor Aiken and the board for honoring me.
Let's talk about something else. I remember because it was the year, or about the year that on the series in the same year, you had a very well-known young female violinist, Midori. She performed on the series in the same year. Unbelievable at the time to many. At Wright Auditorium, you had Tony Bennett. Those were two acts the same year on the series, and you received a very prestigious honor in or about that time, maybe not specifically about that, but it was honoring the selection of artists and the quality of artists that you had brought to the Performing Arts Series. Tell us about that.
The Association of College, University, and Community Performing Arts Association presented me at the annual conference in New York in 1982 with the Fannie Taylor Award. The award was named in honor of our first executive director, who had long since retired. She had an outstanding career at the University of Wisconsin. And this award is presented annually to one person that the board deems worthy to receive it, because that individual has led a concert program or series from humble beginnings to an outstanding series. And they presented it to me, and I was very proud to receive it.
Well, that's quite an honor to be recognized as being one of the best performing arts series, not only in North Carolina, but in the entire country.
Well, it really recognizes our committee and all. It is not an I thing. It is we. We work together, a committee of students, faculty, and public representatives. I made sure in having a committee that we represented the constituencies that supported the series, public, on campus, both faculty, staff, and students. And it recognizes what all of us had done over the years to grow a series from really, to begin one, and grow it into one that was considered one of the top series in the whole country.
You know, the other thing that impresses me, Rudy, is that not only did you book, we've talked about Duke Ellington and Tony Bennett and Arthur Rubinstein and the top names that performed in the greatest concert halls in the world, played right here at Wright Auditorium, but you kept records of all that. And you have archived at the library at East Carolina University a list of the artists, their management, the date that they performed, the amount of money that they were paid to perform. That is a priceless piece of history that goes along with your legacy with the Performing Arts Series, and something that 100 years from now, when people look back at that, they'll just find that astonishing and unbelievable. Thank you for doing that.
Well, just before I retired, I had my secretary to go through the folders we had for each year and to put together for me a list for each year, as you just described, of each attraction, of all of the artists and attractions, and the dates that we presented them, the management from whom we booked them, and the feed. And even today, to go back as I do from time to time, just for fun, and look at some of those pages, to look at the fees we paid those artists and the fees that artists charge today, it's amazing. We, over the years, we did have to pay more and more. Late in my career, we brought Itzhak Perlman, the great violinist, to ECU, and the fee was $40,000.
Wow.
And many years ago, when the Canadian Brass was just getting started, I booked them for $3,000. And we brought them back about 20 years later, and the fee was over $30,000. So there was real inflation, and of course, they had established the fact that they were the best touring of the brass ensembles, and it was a treat to get to meet and get acquainted with these artists. We brought Ray Charles and his orchestra here a couple of times, and Ray's manager used to send me a Christmas card each year for a number of years. I know Ray didn't because he was blind, but Carol Channing, the great actress with the Hello Dolly fame and many other shows, we had Carol Channing here, and I used to receive a Christmas card from Carol, and they came from her. It was her signature.
You had another act that I remember seeing that was very unusual, and wasn't it the Royal Guard from England that performed at Minges Coliseum? What was that act?
This was the Grenadier and Scots Guards.
Yes.
Two different, the Grenadier Band and the Scots Guards, and they put on a terrific performance, but we had to put them in Minges Coliseum because they needed the area to use for marching and all kinds of performances. It was quite a show.
And I remember the Commandant from Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point attended that evening.
Really?
It was, and of course, that was quite an honor to have him come in. So the Performing Arts Series was a lot of different things. It wasn't just big bands or other things. And I think the admirable part of what you did was you were very open-minded, but you always sought out the best of the best.
That was one thing we tried to strive for, and our budget limitations did not allow us to book a big name for every performance day. Right. We had 10 attractions each year, and to make our budget work, my philosophy was, and this is what we did, we would book 3 attractions or artists whose names were familiar to everybody. They were so popular, and they cost a lot of money. Then we would book 3 or 4 that were well known in their particular area, such as a violinist, a pianist, a vocalist. And then to balance the budget, we would book the remaining 3 or 4 new artists. Artists or ensembles that I had seen and heard in a showcase in New York or in other cities where I attended conferences, and not only using my opinion, but advice and suggestions from colleagues who were there. We would see and hear the artist and agree, this one is really going to be good, and so on and so forth. So we would balance our series that way, and some of these new artists went on to make it really big. For example, we booked the pianist Andre Schub when he was beginning for about $600. And years later, he was getting thousands upon dollars for a performance. The pianist Murray Pariah, we booked at a very modest fee. Later on, he was drawing huge audiences and commanding a very sizable fee. And that's just a couple.
Well, and something else I'd like you to comment about, because something strikes me, and that's the difference in colleges, performing arts series, and just about anything that you look at. And that is that the role leadership plays in great organizations. Talk a little bit about how you feel. It's always important not only for you to be a great leader, but you have to have backing from your boss. And in this case, it'd be the chancellor of the university who said, you know, this is important stuff. We need you to do that. How important have the leaders, the chancellors of ECU been to be able for you to do what you did?
Well, I certainly enjoyed working under every chancellor we had, and I thought, and I still do think, that we had a great relationship. I did not report to the chancellor. My boss was the vice chancellor for student life. Over the years, I was promoted from assistant dean of student affairs to associate dean, and later to assistant vice chancellor for student life. So I reported directly to the vice chancellor for student life, who reported to the chancellor. But I always had ready access to every chancellor we had, and I certainly made sure that the chancellor and his wife received invitations to our events, and they attended. And we had their support. I was granted the authority from the beginning to not only negotiate, but to sign the contracts in the name of the university. I did not submit them to any lawyer or any other higher authority. I handled the contracts solely myself. And now, speaking of contracts, I developed an addendum to the contracts because of the incident I've already mentioned of Duke Ellington flying to Greenville, South Carolina.
Yeah.
Among the clauses in the addendum was one that clearly pointed out that, and it was sad to have to do this, that Greenville, North Carolina does not have commercial airline service. If you fly to Greenville, South Carolina, you will not be able to make your date, and I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
it was more concisely written than that. But I stated that if you do this, you will pay us for all costs of promoting and preparing for your performance.
Yeah, if they don't get there.
And I had a few performers do that, and they paid.
Mm-hmm.
I was in New York one time after a big pop performance by Ike and Tina Turner in the Coliseum. They didn't show. And I had an appointment with an official of the American Federation of Musicians. And to make the long story short, they put a blackball on Ike and Tina Turner until they paid us. They would not allow them to accept any more dates until they paid us all our expenses.
Yeah, they were booked and they didn't come.
That's right.
Wow.
So in the addendum, we also pointed out that you will submit to us so many days prior to the performance your program, so that we will have in plenty of time to see what you will perform, and the freedom to ask for any changes. And all those things we put in this addendum, and it was accepted. It was signed by the artist. We had one clause that if you book a performance within a radius of 75 miles of Greenville, North Carolina, during the current season, your concert with us will automatically be canceled. And we had one performer, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned this, his name escapes me, to book over at Wesleyan College.
Oh, very close. Yeah,
And I contacted his management. And as a result, I negotiated a 50% reduction in his fee to perform here because he had violated our contract.
Well, you were a great negotiator, and on behalf of the university. And again, you went from East Carolina Teachers College to East Carolina College to East Carolina University during not only your time as a student here, but your tenure as an employee and in charge of the Performing Arts
Saw
Series.
a lot of changes, a lot of growth.
Yes, and a lot of it, you did such wonderful things and brought us such wonderful attractions. We really want to thank you for doing that.
It was my pleasure, and I enjoy attending today. I just hope people will continue attending.
Thank you for speaking with us today.
It's been a pleasure.